Welcome to Jess Klein's Big Table. My name is Jess Klein. I'm a singer-songwriter, touring artist, and recording artist. And this podcast is going to feature conversations with fellow artists and activists about the intersections between ancestors, art, and activism. So some questions we're going to dig into in these conversations include who and where do we come from? What lineages and forebears do we draw upon, biological and otherwise, for inspiration and strength in our creative and social justice work? Jess Klein's Big Table is recorded on the traditional lands of the Lumbee, Chiraw, Catawba, Saponi, Occaneechi, Ino, and Shakori people. This is the inaugural episode of Jess Klein's Big Table, and I'm so excited to share a conversation with you that I had with my friend Trevia Woods. Trevia is my friend and neighbor here in North Carolina. Trevia Woods is a multiracial woman with Indigenous ancestors who has 2 decades of experience in bodywork, education, and community building. She has roots in the Midwest and Colorado, and after traveling the world, finds herself back in America, finding her roots and how she belongs in the world. Trevia supports people in unpacking cultural appropriation, community building, and helping people expand their capacity to hold many truths about our lineages so we feel more connection and belonging in these times. So Trevia has been a light post on my journey to understanding certain aspects of social justice work and how I can show up to it. She came into my world at a time when I was just sort of digging deeper into what it means to be Jewish, what it means to be the granddaughter of immigrants, what it means to be white Jewish granddaughter of immigrants, anti-racist, like all these things. And she has such a natural gift for sharing her wisdom. She's just a natural teacher, and I feel really blessed to have her in my world. So you can find out more about Trevia's offerings in the show notes. And in the meantime, please enjoy this conversation. Trevia, welcome to the Big Table. I'm so glad to have you here. I guess I just wanted to start by asking you about your cultural background, where you grew up, and how you feel that informed your sense of who you are and the kind of work that you've chosen to do.
Oh, well, let's see. I was born and raised in Iowa, and to a blue-collar type family background, and I have Indigenous ancestors on one side, my mom's side of the family, and the other side of my family was I think mostly German ancestry, like Pennsylvania Dutch, came through a lot, mostly from England, a little bit of Scots Irish in there as well. And and then on my mom's side, it's been really interesting to learn about my roots there, because there's been a policy in America of termination and obviously colonization, right? And so what has happened for a lot of Indigenous people is that they've literally lost their connection to their communities, right? And my family is unfortunately a victim of that. And so that's why I don't actually identify as an Indigenous person, because Indigenous people get to decide who's in their community, right? And but my grandmother was Indigenous, and I was very close with her. So yeah, just that. And then there was also a lot of European and a little bit of other type of ancestors mixed in there. But what I didn't know until I moved here to North Carolina is that I didn't think I had any ancestors from this area, and actually have quite a few. Some possible that actually owned enslaved people. Wow. And some that fought, went to Tennessee and fought on the side of the Union against and got killed during the Confederate War, and during the Civil War. So a really, really interesting, a lot of things to hold.
Yeah, that's a lot of different Yeah, you said it.
It's a big mix.
It's a big mix.
Here we are in America.
I know. You're just walking embodiment of America.
Yeah. So I moved here in, I think, 2015 and to Hillsborough. And I've never lived here before. I'm from the West. I grew up in the Midwest. I lived in Colorado. I've lived overseas in some different countries in Asia. And so when I came here, I had some friends and family that were residing here, but I didn't realize that I had some roots here. So that has been a very fun and interesting journey.
How did you discover those roots?
Mostly through the tool I mostly have been using is Ancestry.com, and then working with other people. We don't have any oral history of this, except that my Indigenous ancestors came from Tennessee, and and a lot of people who there's like a migration pathway of people coming in through Virginia, right, and then coming down here and into the mountains and then into Tennessee. So a lot of the my European ancestry too from that line was mixed in with that.
Yeah. I first met you I don't know, a couple years ago. I don't really remember. Well, we met because we were both attending a Joy in the Time of Apocalypse workshop with Adrienne Marie Brown and Sonia Renee Taylor and Jessica Laniato.
Yep.
And we kind of met in the chat space, and Trevia offered to have like a local gathering of people who had been on that call. And as soon as I started looking you up, I was so fascinated by the work that you do, because you are combining all these aspects of social justice and embodiment and somatic work, and connecting to our roots and understanding how all that matters and how those aren't separate ideas. I'm wondering sort of when you when did you was it sort of piece by piece? Like it seems like you're connected to all those ideas and then you bring them together. And I'm just kind of wondering, like, how did that come together as like Trevia's work? Like, was it one piece and then it led you somewhere else? What was the sort of pathway of that?
Yeah, I mean, I think anyone, especially in their 40s, right? We have a little lived experience, right? So I've been able to. I've had a few lifetimes before this, right? And, I've had a whole teaching career. I've lived overseas. With that, I have a long massage therapy career that I recently just had to quit both of those careers because I'm disabled now, and so yeah, taking all of that and my lived experience and then coming here back to the States and to North Carolina, I just started really wanting to what am I trying to say here? I wanted to find some grounding because I really enjoyed living overseas really a lot. I loved being an immigrant in other countries. I love the camaraderie. I really connect with people who are willing to do that. But also I had a son. I still have a son actually, but I had a son who is American, and he could be a dual citizen of Germany, but he had never really lived here. Like, he was born here and was here until he was like 1.5, and then we moved, and he never lived here. And so when I was leaving a marriage, and I was like, I need to bring him back and let him experience this. And I was really excited because it was going to be an election year, and I was excited to think that I could come and naively be a part of more progressive movement, right? And it ended up being, well, a dumpster fire, as we all know. But sometimes I suppose you have to be like, hit the bottom, right, to like kind of figure out what's really important. And what I've learned, and I've just kept reading and being introduced to people, and in my teaching career there is, I'm not going to get her name right because I don't have it, but her first name is Rhonda, and I know that she works in Durham, and she does a lot of racial equity work and social justice work for children and parents. And so she came in to do some stuff in our school at the time. And it just really resonated with me, especially as someone who right now passes. Sometimes people look at me a little sideways and be like, what are you?
Yeah.
And so one of the only reasons that I talk about being mixed racially, if you will, is because I didn't pass for white when I was younger, right? Like the question I always got was, what are you? And I got, and I've been in some situations that frankly were scary, and there was racism going on, and in different contexts. It hasn't happened often, because and as I've gotten older, I'm much more white passing. So that's an important piece to why I say that. But as someone who was in a place that was predominantly white, and after teaching in like these very mixed, a minority of European and European heritage, and my son being a part of all of that, and I being a part of all of that, and our whole family, didn't. We were all multi-ethnic, and to come here and be in a place that's still very segregated, right, and still for reasons, right, like it's a deep history, and I just remember like kind of hiding it, right, like I just really didn't talk about being queer. I didn't talk about being have Indigenous heritage or being mixed, or just any of my experience with that. I just tried to fit in and blend in because I was, I had to support a kid. I was a single mom, right? Like there was all this stuff going on. And when those workshops started happening, and like Adrienne Marie Brown started putting out her work, and like all these different authors and wonderful things started happening, I started just soaking it in. Yeah, it was just like kind of built on that.
Yeah.
It resonated with me to my core though. And then like once the blinders are like, once I was like, yeah. And then I met someone else. She's a business coach more, and now like she's a thought leader, I would say. Her name's Kelly Deals. She's a Canadian out of Canada. A Canadian out of Canada, of course she is. She has a European descent. She's white.
Okay. Yeah.
And she lives in a white body, but
right.
She has such a great nuance, and so I started learning about that as well, and it just really helped me see things in a different light and see the bigger picture and how dominant culture affects everyone.
Yeah, and also how, listening to you, how you kind of opened up to weaving all your experiences together, and the astrology part of me is like, you're such a Sagittarius because you're such a learner and a teacher. But I think that can be really inspiring for people who are listening, because I don't know. I personally, I feel like it's taken me a long time just to understand the different things that I want to do that matter to me and how to weave them together. And especially in the culture we live in, it's like, what's the lane you're in, and it's not,
all that compartmentalization.
Yeah, it's sort of like, okay, so we were talking about compartmentalization and how, I don't know, just when you said that, I thought about that. Feels like that's part of dominant culture. Somehow the compartmentalization of what we're supposed to do with our lives seems somehow connected to everything else we're taught to try to compartmentalize. So I think that the way that you are tying things together and offering it back to people is groundbreaking, and I'm grateful that you're doing.
Yeah, there's a lot of people doing great work in this area. So
yeah, absolutely. So just for folks who are listening, Trevia was really generous to meet with me when I was trying to figure out how to put this podcast together and get started. And we were talking about a lot of different things. We were talking about you had mentioned, Treva, being disabled, and when we met at your house, we talked about how social justice movements can be ableist, and you said this is what I wrote down that you said because it was something I wanted to ask you more about. When you bring in disabled people, it changes how the event will be, and that's the point. Every time we widen the lens, it becomes something new, and that's the point. And I just was hoping you'd be willing to speak more to the power of like adapting like that and widening the lens and how the possibilities that can come with that.
Yeah, I mean, the thing about being human is we don't know what we don't know, right? And in our society, especially in the U.S., it is extremely ableist, and it's such an interesting concept because we're born. And there actually is a whole industry to help with babies, right? Like that's kind of, we know about that. But anything extra, and it's like we all, if we're lucky, will end up needing care, right, at some point. And a lot of us can be temporarily disabled through injuries, through whatever. And it's just about being human. And the whole, people have worth. We're not like that idea of capitalism, right? We're trying to unlearn, like we're trying to decolonize that. We're trying to unpack that. And this idea that our worth is based on what we can contribute, and now you see what's happening in our countries. Like, oh, women are only valued to contribute babies in some sects, right? In some parts of our country and beliefs. And we know that that's, not true. And so but it's so easy to be like, well, we don't have time, right? Like disabled people really are the last, place that people really they just can't see the discrimination, or they can't understand. And so, and until I was disabled, I didn't really understand it either, right? So just I want to be really clear about that, that I'm not here to, this isn't a shame, like, there's nothing shameful about this. It's like, we just do the best we can, and we keep just trying to include more people. And so having disabled people, have them in the planning, right? You have to have them in the planning, and it's going to look different, and it's going to take longer, and it's going to be more thoughtful, and it might be more expensive, and you might have to do less. You know what? We need rest. We need time for joy. We need to pace ourselves for this long haul. This isn't a sprint. Right. And when I could just think about, I mean, there's a lot of different people that have been marginalized in this world, but I'll specifically talk to something I actually know about, and that is like Indigenous people in North America, especially. Like they've already gone through the apocalypse, y'all. Right. Some of my ancestors went through the apocalypse, and they're still here. Still, many are here. Right. And you have to have joy. You have to have rest. And something about many Indigenous cultures that I love dearly, that's really taught me a lot and helped me unpack more of this dominant culture narrative that I grew up in, is that it is the most vulnerable among us that makes us a community and makes us who we are, right? And if I could think of the book where I learned that, I will mention it. But there is a fiction book from a Canadian Indigenous writer. There's bones in the title. I have long COVID, so word recall is not like this is part of my disability. I have some cognitive effects from long COVID, and but anyway, it's a book, and they're running, right? They're like hiding in the forest, and it's all these different Indigenous people, and they're being hunted because they have a cure in their bones, right? Basically, is the premise. But in just one part, like I don't want to give away any of the story, but they lose their elder, and they lose the youngest, who was a child that they were all caring for, and they were just like, who are we? Like, it was easier for them to move. They moved faster, right? We hear about this. Oh, we're joy the apocalypse, right? We hear about all these people talking about we have to be ready, we have to know what's going to happen, and nobody's thinking about like the people who can't run, the people who can't do, you know what I mean? And that's our responsibility, right? Yeah. This is what community is about. And so it's just about embracing everyone and bringing all those people to the table and allowing it to be something different.
Yeah.
Right.
So it's just powerful. I mean, and yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's it's like the concept of universal design. So in terms of buildings, right, and I'm not using the right word, like streets and buildings and how accessible they are. Sure, it costs a little bit more to put that sidewalk ramp in, or it costs more to put the whatever it is, but it when you're pushing your baby stroller, when you're walking your dog, when you're on crutches because you broke your ankle, when you want to take a family member out that needs a wheelchair and you can actually do, you know what I mean? Like, it isn't too long ago that disabled people weren't allowed to leave their homes. It was actually illegal to be out, right? It was illegal for
Wow.
people who were visibly disabled to be out in public, and they were all institutionalized, and they didn't have autonomy or rights. So it's a big marginalized group that people don't often think about until someone very close to them or themselves has to do it. But
Yeah. And then it's like, oh, this is a human who I care about, and now let's look. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
We're challenged to unpack it. I'm constantly still unpacking it. So
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, even just thinking about it, in the space of this conversation, I'm just thinking about just like the massive blindness that, I mean, metaphorically speaking, that we're conditioned to have, because it's just, just thinking about all the spaces that you could not get into in a wheelchair, or just, I mean, just even that, it's just,
like trying to go to one of your concerts or your events,
yeah,
like, that's just rife for me, right? I have to be
yeah,
like, how crowded is it? One, because I have to be COVID. I have long COVID. I've gotten it twice, but the second time I got much worse, and so I need to not get COVID if possible again,
yeah,
and no one's mitigating for that now, right? And so the only thing I can do is me. I have to bear the burden in an already compromised state to go enjoy life, or to have joy, or to support people's art, or support anything in my community. It's really difficult to do that, and it takes a lot of bandwidth. But yeah, just like, what are the chairs like? I live in a bigger body. What where are the restrooms? How accessible are the restrooms? Right? Like, is there a bunch of stairs? Where's the park? The parking's a big one
yeah,
for me. But just like, also just getting to a point where you can say you're disabled is also really hard. We're so ableist that that's the last thing we want to be able to say. That, and I think being fat as well, like, the weight stigma and disability, I think, are two real deep ones that we're not really contending with.
yeah, yeah, yeah. This kind of leads me, I think, into a related quote that I saw on your website, where you said, "You're very quotable." It's like,
Oh wow!
yeah, you're very like clear spoken. When I've listened back and looked at the transcripts of some of my previous conversations, it's embarrassing how many times I say "like" or "just" or So it's nice to.
You'll be taking a million ums from me. I promise you.
Okay. Okay. On your website, you say, tending a brave community space grounded in anti-racism principles and practices is deeply important to me. This work takes time and space and action. And yeah, just sort of listening to you speak about all the limitations that we put on people with disabilities in terms of accessibility, it tells me, we're so focused often on the action piece, and the time and space is almost like, oh, we don't have those. It's like I mean, I guess you had spoken previously about how some of your Indigenous ancestors, they already survived the apocalypse, some of them, and some of the culture survived, and like to understand that marathon, not a sprint, mindset.
Well, I think one of the things that makes me think of this right now is, urgency is a trait of white supremacy, right?
Yeah.
So we can just name that, right?
Yeah.
And sure, there are, life and death is often urgent. I get that, and but still, often people, especially people who are new to the work, right? Or, which is great. Like come in and listen.
Yeah.
Come in and sit down. Come in and, you know, don't do the action piece first, right? Like come in and be willing to really have and build up your nervous system to handle the very uncomfortable reality we're living in, and
Yeah.
not being able to disassociate from it all the time, right? Like kind of like what dominant society kind of does, and that takes time. That takes
Yeah.
space, that takes a willingness to be in an uncomfortable place, and then the action will come. And the other thing I notice in this is if you take time and space, right, and you're willing to let mentors come in, you're willing to allow to listen, because what I've seen, and I've done this myself. Again, this is a shame-free space we're talking in.
Absolutely.
Said is nothing I haven't done, right?
Yeah.
Is you get fired up about something, you're like, oh, I should start this thing, right? I mean, how many times have I done that? But how many times have we heard that, right? And then when you're in it for a while and you look around and you're like, oh, especially Black and Indigenous women have already been doing this forever, like past, and so I'm like, oh, okay. So I encourage people to look for what is already there and see how you can contribute, right?
Yeah.
And then still, obviously, do your art, be creative, like find some joy, but it's just not something that we can embody overnight. It's not something that you read a book and here we go.
Yeah.
There's always the first step, like take the first step, but the sense of urgency really gets us tripped up.
Yeah.
It works well for capitalism and for the patriarchy and all of that, right? It works great.
Yeah.
But it's not serving any of us.
Yeah. I really love, as you were saying that, I'm like, that's me. I am new to this work. Like I've read lots of books, and I was a women's studies major back in the 90s, and I guess I just want to say for people who are listening, like, part of why I wanted to do this podcast is because this is new for me, and I wanted to be able to hear from people I admire, and ask them to share with people listening, like I'm guessing, because based on my music fan base, it's going to be mostly white people, maybe mostly middle-aged white people. I'm not sure. That's a lot of people who come to my shows, and so I just want to say, like, that's me. We're many of us are new to this, and so let's listen to the people who've been doing it a little longer and study their influences and understand how we become part of this for the long haul, and not try and take over and be like, I've figured it out. Here I come. I'm saving everybody.
Yeah, it's it's a thing.
Yeah. I feel like there's so many places, questions I want to ask you, but would you be willing to talk a little bit about? I know you have lived and traveled overseas. I know that you lived and worked in Saudi Arabia and China, and I guess I'm wondering, what did you feel? I don't know if I'm asking you a question or making a comment. For me, traveling overseas gave me a lot of perspective on America and being American, and I'm wondering if that, maybe just talk a little bit about your experiences and anything that you want to share about those.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely stripped real quick, this idea of American exceptionalism, because that's, I I was raised in Midwestern, culture here. Went to the public school, just had a kind of, in essence, somewhat of a regular time with that. And so, I only knew the stories that I knew, right? And the interesting thing is that when I went overseas, I'll just have to talk about this a little bit, but it opened my eyes in a way, and it was just such a rich experience, and especially the last few years, because I was an international teacher and I have my credentials here in the States. So the way that works is that when you go teach at international schools, it's like you're teaching here, right? You only speak in English. You're teaching most usually American curriculum, unless it's IB, but your student body is very mixed and very from usually a lot of different countries. And I got to meet so many different people, right? And learn about so many different ways of being. And the last few years, I ended up not being a teacher. But so I guess what I was trying to say, backtrack for a minute, so a little on to tangent, is the international teaching scene in American schools is usually just Canadian Americans. So I was really in this insular experience, very busy teaching, burning it on all ends, and staying kind of insulated in that. But when I quit teaching and I just did my massage and bodywork practice in Saudi Arabia, I ended up helping co-found a women's circle then, and I was the only American, right? And it was women from all over, and that's when I really had profound, deep, meaningful relationships with women from all walks of life. And it was one of the most beautiful experiences in my life but it took time. We took time to be together. We met every month, right? We just supported each other in a way, and we tried something new. And that, I'm still very close to many of the people in that, even though I'm not there. And I also learned about, silly things like healthcare, right? And how horrific we are to women and children in this country in terms of just having babies or child leave, or just, it's torture level. It's just so no one can understand, and even now when my American friends come back to visit or move, it's just the how expensive it is and how unsustainable it is to live here, and just everything there. It's a very difficult. So
comparatively to what you were saying. Yeah.
So I have mixed feelings because I know many people who live overseas, enjoy it, and I don't begrudge people in marginalized groups, heading out, but there is a little bit of this new thing you're hearing a lot. It's how do you move out of this country because it's falling apart? And I'm y'all kind of don't hello colonizers,
yeah,
you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's you come and ruin everything, and then now we're not going to take responsibility for what our ancestors have. My ancestors too, right? We're not going to take responsibility and be here for the hard stuff and be here for community, and and so that's a little disheartening. I get it, and again, not a message of shame, but it's just so interesting to see that mindset because Indigenous people aren't doing that, right? You know what I mean? There's a difference. There's a real connection. We lack that connection here in our society with the land and with people. I find in a real way.
Yeah. I'm really glad that you mentioned that because I feel like, a month and a half ago when we were in a different place with this election, I'm not gonna lie, I was I am writing to friends overseas and being any room for artists over there?
Yeah.
I'm not gonna lie, but I also felt another voice that was build community through this podcast. That's what you can do. And I mean, it's I'm just glad that you said that because I just feel there's so much power in it's like, I know we spoke about this when we met, but the nuclear family thing is like, it's so doesn't work in so many ways, and there's so much power in just really connect to your community and see what you can do together when you're coming together with any kind of shared desire to make something better just in that small space. It can open something up that wasn't there before. It can help you feel supported in intangible and tangible ways. Like it's such a powerful again, like I just think something that I somehow didn't pick. I mean, I feel like I have family members who are invested in community and stuff, but I somehow didn't pick it up. Anyway, that's me, but I'm glad that I'm glad that you're talking about it, because I just feel like community it's just so important, especially, we're, I think, by design, very isolated in so many ways, especially in COVID and social media and the everything of it. Would you also, you had mentioned in your notes, let's see, you said, well, two things. I guess I had posed a question about who do you call on, living or ancestors, when things get hard with speaking up. And you mentioned your grandma Shirley, and I think that you mentioned her again when you were speaking earlier. Would you be willing to talk a little bit about her and her relationship with you?
Yeah, my grandma Shirley was born in the 30s in Iowa. She had a big family. Her mom was Indigenous as well, and the survival technique was marry white men.
Yeah.
Right? So,
Yeah.
so that kind of is how that worked out. And her mom died when she was very young. And I have like a long family lineages of parents dying very young, and so just in my research and in the oral histories. But she ended up having to live with her paternal grandmother, and ended up, was living in, dealt with a lot of poverty. She was a woman of color in Iowa in a time when that just, wasn't the thing. When they say, make America great again, let's go back to the 50s. And I think of my grandma, and I was like, it wasn't so great for her. You know? She had to deal with a lot of violence and discrimination and just really horrible stuff. And yet, she persevered, and we were very close. But she also suffered with alcoholism, and she had a lot of health issues that are very typical, actually, of many Indigenous populations, and things that I also now have, which is really interesting. It's like that intergenerational stuff really does matter. But she was just such a strong woman in many ways, and she was just someone I think I was the most attached to. And yeah, but she died when I was 19. She was only 63, so she left a little soon there. And yeah, she's with me a lot, and it's been described to me, she's got a little bit, she's like kind of a jokester, right? She doesn't take herself too seriously. Sometimes I do that, and then I have to get myself out. But she likes to play pranks and just be jokey and whatnot. So I know a little bit of that. And it's interesting because when I think about what will my kids remember me, they only know one part of me, right? So when I think and I hear stories about my grandma, or I see pictures or whatever, I get a bigger picture of who she was. And I still only know, a little bit. Yeah, so that's my grandma Shirley.
The prankster energy sounds also like that has to be like a survival thing, the humor, and let's not take it too seriously.
Yeah. She didn't have a lot to laugh about, but she did. Yeah. Right?
Yeah.
Joy in ways that sustained my family found my family, has a lot more poverty and substance abuse issues and a lot of like abuse. And it, not all sides of my family do, but that one is a definitely like, and lack of intergenerational wealth building. It's just so very evident, right? Like it's like my family is like really a case study, right? Like, oh, here's the all white side and what it looks like, and there's still things that it's hard, right? But they're looking at it from both sides, but yeah, that's someone that I think about, and she's the reason that I do this work, which is an interesting thing because she's the one that told me to break the cycle. So.
Wow. Did she say that directly or? Oh, wow.
I was like 11 or 12. I remember it clearly. I actually wrote it. One thing, I'm in grad school at UNC. I'm getting my master's in social work there, right? And which is funny. I'll fingers crossed here, folks, that I will graduate before I'm 50. Okay, right before. I guess you're never too old. I'm doing that because of my disability. I'm trying to find a way to do a career that is accessible for my body, and something that I feel is joyful and will help, and be a contributor. But the whole point is that I wrote about that whole thing in my college essay. So.
Wow. Would you be willing to share what she said specifically, or?
I mean, that's like, I know some, but it was more like describing the whole scene and like why I did what I did. And I mean, that was the gist of the I don't remember it word for word, but I do remember she said, you have to be the one to break the cycle. And she didn't know what she was asking. She didn't know that meant I needed to move away and that I needed to untangle myself from my family for a while and figure, work and do that. And it still continues to today.
Yeah. So. That's incredible. Something you said made me want to ask you, would you talk a little bit about how you work with people individually, like when you have clients who are looking to unpack cultural appropriation or connect with their heritage and their roots? Would you talk a little about that?
Yeah, I mean, I work sometimes one-on-one, but mostly I work in more of a context. Yeah, either or. And sometimes people want to work one-on-one because they have a lot of shame or they're really nervous. And they don't want to say the wrong thing, or they don't want to do. So the spaces that I moderate and host and hold, where we really, really work hard to make it where we're all in this together. We're all breathing. We're all in this, like, Kelly Deal says, we're all in the water, we're all wet, right? Like, no one's coming from this, these systems of oppression, right? Unscathed or we all stuff that we can work on. And so that's kind of like the way I come at it. And so some people just need to think about, I do kind of like an inquiry method with them through like things they're thinking about that might be cultural appropriation. And again, it's not a shame thing. It's like there's a way to turn it from appropriation to more appreciation, right? And like, let's figure out how we can take steps to get there. And it just, another trait of white supremacy is binary thinking.